Today we're going to talk about the Supreme Court draft overturning Roe and how it'll backfire on the GOP. And I interview Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal on what Congress can do about codifying abortion protections, why the Republicans keep trying to make this about the leak, and whether this will be the defining issue of the midterms. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're listening to No Lie. So this past week, Politico released a first draft of the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe, which guarantees access to a safe and legal abortion in the United States. The draft majority opinion was written by Justice Samuel Alito, and that read, quote, "Roe is egregiously wrong from the start. We hold that Roe and Casey must be overruled. It's time to heed the Constitution and return the issue of abortion to the people's elected representatives." Now, I should note for accuracy's sake that because the decision was leaked and not yet published, it's still possible that the justices could change their votes, but I wouldn't count on it because this is the end result of a decades-long effort by Republicans to get this exact outcome. And yet, when you actually listen to what the GOP has to say about it, this is what you hear.
These leaked documents showing the Supreme Court voted to overturn Roe v. Wade. Forgive me for offering opinion right up front, but I call it a betrayal of the Supreme Court. How about you?
I was flabbergasted. It is truly stunning. In over 2 centuries of our nation's history, this has never happened.
You need, it seems to me, excuse the lecture, to concentrate on what the news is today. Not a leaked draft, but the fact that the draft was leaked.
Chief Justice John Roberts has tasked the Supreme Court Marshal with looking into how that draft opinion made its way from the High Court and into the hands of Politico publishers.
When we stop loving our institutions, our separation of powers, the court's confidentiality is all part of that, wrapped up into that narrative, then we're going to save Ukraine? I don't think so.
Right. We can't save Ukraine if there's a leak at the Supreme Court. Right. We have to love our institutions, says Laura Ingraham, whose misinformation about the election helped inspire a mob of insurrectionists to try and stop Congress from certifying the race. It must be nice to live completely untethered from any sense of shame or hypocrisy. And I just want to say one thing on the leak. And I wouldn't normally draw attention to the Republican talking point, but I actually think this distraction is important because it is so lame, so pathetic, so transparent, so boring, that it actually puts on full display just how horrified they are of acknowledging what they've done. Remember, 70% of Americans support Roe. Only 28% oppose that Supreme Court decision. That is woefully unpopular. And so while they want it, they couldn't possibly admit that because the optics are so bad that Americans would revolt. And so instead, Republicans are so desperate to distract your attention away from the issue at hand that they are actually trying to convince you that the real issue in all of this was that there was a leak and that the decision that would have come out in a few weeks anyway came out this week instead. And so that is the scandal of a lifetime. If you needed any example of how stupid Republicans think their voters are, this is it. And so, as Republicans continue this public quest to find a leaker, just know that this is actually par for the course for them. You could not get any more quintessentially Republican than by launching a witch hunt to find the villain. They love focusing in on one person to pin the blame on because the GOP always needs a boogeyman. We had 40 years of it being Hillary Clinton, then it was AOC, Dr. Fauci during the pandemic, Hunter Biden now. There always needs to be someone whose lives Fox and Republicans can turn upside down and make out to be some evil villain because they've figured out that vague complaints aren't super effective. But when you can find a person and focus all of your energy on that person and vilify them and dig up dirt on them and defame them and make them the root of all evil in the world, then you can focus all of that energy where you want it. So now Republicans are desperately searching for the leaker because if they can find a skull to sacrifice, then they know that they'll be able to change the narrative. It's a tried and true tactic. And so now it's all about the leaker. And so they'll opine on which justice has the most partisan clerks, which one looks the sneakiest, which one has an Instagram page that says the words pro-choice on it in a recent picture. And it's not because they actually think they'll find the person. It's just that they need to feed the narrative. It's about doing anything humanly possible to ensure that you're not paying attention to the 1,000-pound elephant in the middle of the room because, God forbid, they own up to the thing that they themselves push for. Now, as for the decision itself, I want to read one specific quote by Alito. He said, quote, The Constitution makes no reference to abortion, and no such right is implicitly protected by any constitutional provision, including the one on which the defenders of Roe and Casey now chiefly rely, the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. That provision has been held to guarantee some rights that are not mentioned in the Constitution, but any such right must be deeply rooted in this nation's history and tradition. The right to end an abortion is from 1973. It's almost 50 years old. If that's not deeply rooted, what about interracial marriage, which was decided a few years earlier than that? Is that not deeply rooted either? What about black women having the right to vote, which was decided just before that? Was that not deeply rooted? What about when the court decided that racial segregation is unconstitutional? Decided just before that. Are those not deeply rooted? Like hell, same-sex marriage was decided just a few years ago. Republicans love to warn about a slippery slope, but when your entire rationale for striking down a constitutional right is that you don't think 50 years ago is deeply enough rooted in our nation's history to count, then what you've done is put a hell of a lot more rights on the chopping block. This is what you get when you have partisan hacks whose rationale is so tortured to conform to their pre-desired outcome that they don't even realize what else they're fucking up in the process. Alito would go on to criticize Casey, the case that upheld the right to an abortion that was established in Roe, by saying that it was based, quote, solely on the theory that the right to obtain an abortion is part of the liberty protected by the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause. In other words, he's taking issue with the framework for legal abortion, which I should note is the same framework that the Supreme Court used in a number of other rulings, including Loving v. Virginia, which legalized interracial marriage, Griswold v. Connecticut, which guaranteed access to contraception, Lawrence v. Texas, which decriminalized consensual sex between adults, and Obergefell, which of course legalized same-sex marriage. So I'm sorry, but it would be so aggressively naive to sit here and think that nothing else is in jeopardy when the draft decision itself quite literally sets the stage for reversing all of these constitutional rights. And if you think that this is just me being alarmist, might I remind you that the court just voted to overturn Roe. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Like, this is not a party that's looking for a measured response or incremental change. They will proceed as quickly and boldly and aggressively as possible. Just this past week, Louisiana Republicans voted to advance a bill out of committee making abortion from the moment of fertilization a crime, in which the mother could be charged with homicide. That means if you use a Plan B pill, you can get charged with murder. If you use IVF or an IUD or birth control, you can be charged with murder. If you have a miscarriage and your body doesn't release it and you get an abortion so that you don't die, or if you have an ectopic pregnancy and you get an abortion so that you don't die, you could be charged with murder. Like, I get that we have our usual litmus test issues on the left and right, but at what point, if you are a regular Republican voter, do you watch a woman literally dying in this country and think to yourself, maybe this ain't it? Maybe this isn't why I'm a Republican. Maybe this party has gone too far. Maybe when women are being given literal death sentences, I might not belong to a pro-life party after all. So look, here's what I think needs to happen. First of all, and I speak about this in my interview with Representative Jayapal, we need to keep this issue top of mind. We need to bring the bill codifying Roe up for a vote at least once a month. The Women's Health Protection Act has already passed the House. Senate Majority Leader Schumer should bring this thing up over and over and over again. And if it fails every time, then the American people will be reminded every time where the Republican Party stands on an issue that not only 70% of Americans support, but is one of the most animating issues that 70% of Americans support. We cannot let this be just one more issue relegated to the laundry list of bullshit that Republicans have rammed through. And the other solution here, and I apologize if you've heard me say this on any of my other videos this past week, but I think it bears repeating, and I don't think we hurt ourselves by adopting the Republican strategy of repetition. Everyone needs to find 5 people who didn't vote in the last election. Maybe someone who just turned 18 or 19, maybe a family member who doesn't care about politics, maybe a friend who thinks that elections don't matter. Whoever you have in your life, make a list of 5 people and make them your responsibility. Like, I could sit here every hour of every day and dole out every reason in the world to go vote. It still won't hold a candle to the power that you have over your own personal relationships with people. So please, please, please don't let that power go to waste. Find your 5 people, make them your responsibility, ensure that they go vote for the only party actually willing to defend a woman's right to her own bodily autonomy. We've got an election coming up in November, and I can promise you the results of that election will be cataclysmic. So remember the feeling that you have right now and hold on to it. Republicans are banking on us for getting this by November, so don't give them the satisfaction. To listen to my interview with Representative Jayapal, where we talk about what Congress can do to codify abortions, why the Republican Party keeps trying to make this all about the leak, and whether this will be the defining issue of the midterms, click the thumbnail right here on the screen or check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel.